Hello, my name's Katie Williams. I'm a clinical nurse specialist working within the Living Well service at Arthur Rank Hospice. When people visit our service, we hope to encourage them to consider their future care needs. In the following video, I hope to give you a brief understanding of advanced care planning and what that may involve. Why consider advanced care planning? We happily plan for all major events in life, such as weddings, birthdays, Christmas, holidays, and definitely for having a baby. Plan for dying and our own death is something we rarely do and may even put off. Even as a fit and healthy person, it's helpful to have an idea of what we might wish for at the end of life, and especially when faced with a life-limiting illness. We can never be certain when our health or life might change. What can be considered? There are several decisions that could be considered when planning for our future and for our end-of-life care. This can reduce our own stress and perhaps the stress of those we love as well. It may also offer a feeling of control at a time when there is often increased uncertainty. It is likely to be helpful to speak with your doctors or specialist nurse about what might happen in the future. It can be difficult to plan without some information about what to expect, even if some uncertainty remains. Putting plans in place, making arrangements, talking through plans with family and friends can be extremely emotional. It does not have to be achieved in one sitting and can be revisited when the time feels right. What to consider? There are several subjects that might be helpful to discuss with those important to you. These may include some or all of the list shown on the screen. It is important to remember that most of these documents are not legally binding. They do, however, provide a guide of someone's wishes and will be taken into account by any professionals involved in your care. Whilst you have the ability and capacity to be involved in decision making, you would always be asked for your thoughts and opinions. There are various resources that can be used to help guide the conversation and support you in planning. It is useful to take short notes for a reminder of what has been discussed. So, thinking about making a will. This is an important document to have, whatever age or stage of life you're at. Without a will, the law decides who will get your possessions, finances, or property. You can make a will on your own, but it is generally best to use a solicitor. The Law Society can provide you with a list of local solicitors, and there's a web address on the screen that can be reached by typing it into your search engine. Many people have heard of a lasting power of attorney, or LPOA, and is another document to consider. An LPOA is a legal document that allows you to appoint one or more person that you trust to make decisions on your behalf when you are unable to make them for yourself. It is important to think carefully about who you appoint and which decisions you are comfortable with them making. Some discussion about how they make decisions about your care and treatment or finances is helpful, and also what happens if an attorney becomes unwell or dies. An LPOA can be made online using the government website and does not need a solicitor to make one. An address for the government website can be copied from the slide. As can be seen, there are two types of LPOA, one for health and welfare and one for property and finances. There are options regarding advanced statements of treatment and care. These are specific documents which you may wish to consider completing to offer thoughts or preferences about your care in the future. These documents may vary in different areas of the country. They may include treatments you accept in the future or what you would like to happen in an emergency. Whilst these documents are not legally binding, if you are unable to communicate your wishes, they are valuable in letting people know all about you and will help inform decisions about your treatment and care. An advanced decision to refuse treatment may be something to think about. In this document, you can be specific about which treatments you would not wish to be given in the future and under or in which circumstances. They must be written in a certain way to ensure they are legally binding, meaning they can be followed when needed. I would advise that you discuss this with your doctors or specialist nurses. Future care needs. or preferred priorities of care. It may be helpful to consider where you would like to be cared for in the future. This may be staying at home with help from your family or staying at home with paid carers coming into your house as often as required. You may decide you would prefer to be in a care home or hospice for end-of-life care. Things to consider are how you would pay for your care, if you are entitled to any benefits, any adaptations that may need to be made to your home, the possibility of moving closer to family or friends, and what support is available locally in the community. We don't often talk about planning for dependents or pets, or practical things like where we keep important documents, such as birth certificates or bank account details, but these are helpful and useful conversations to have. Health professionals may also speak about preferred place of care or preferred place of death. It's important to try and talk to your family and friends about any wishes you may have about how you may be cared for in your last short weeks or days of life. For example, you may have an idea about having peace and quiet, or may prefer some specific music playing or the radio. Some people might like a good, bright lit room, whilst others may prefer it fairly dark. Some people enjoy having their hand held or even a gentle hand massage, whilst for others this would not be welcome. Of course, you cannot always predict how you might feel and may change your mind as your health changes. And on to considering planning for and paying for your own funeral. Talking about what you might like for your funeral with your family and friends may provide great comfort, knowing your funeral is how you want it to be. Some family members may find comfort in helping you to plan a funeral as part of their grieving process. This may include where you would like the service to be, if you'd like to be buried or cremated, what songs or reading you would like, and some thoughts about a eulogy, and whether you would like flowers or donations to a specific organisation. You may also choose to plan the wake. If you choose to pay for your funeral costs in advance, you may wish to set up a funeral prepayment plan. You can find out more about this from the National Association of Funeral Directors. Again, there is a link on the screen. And finally, what's in it for me? It sounds like a number of stressful and emotional conversations. It can seem confusing as there are many ways to plan and each one is slightly different. The conversations can indeed be difficult, especially when speaking with loved ones. However, what people say to us when they've made plans are positive comments like, "It feels like such a relief to have made plans that will help my family when I'm no longer able to help with decisions or am no longer here. It feels as if a weight has been lifted as my loved ones know my feelings. I can now get on with living the rest of my life, knowing I've done the best I can to prepare." Whatever you decide, it's important to discuss this with your loved ones and with the doctors, nurses or any other professionals involved in your care. This will help to relieve stress and enable clear planning. There is further information on the Arthur Rank website, and the final slide shows a few suggestions for further reading. Thank you for watching. Hello, my name is Katie Williams. I'm a clinical nurse specialist working within the Living Well service at Arthur Rank Hospice. When people visit our service, we hope to encourage them to consider their future care needs. In the following video, I hope to give you a brief understanding of advanced care planning and what that may involve. Why consider advanced care planning? We happily plan for all major events in life, such as weddings, birthdays, Christmas, holidays, and definitely for having a baby. Planning for dying and our own death is something we rarely do and may even put off. Even as a fit and healthy person, it's helpful to have an idea of what we might wish for at the end of life, and especially when faced with a life-limiting illness. We can never be certain when our health or life might change. What can be considered? There are several decisions that could be considered when planning for our future and for our end-of-life care. This can reduce our own stress and perhaps the stress of those we love as well. It may also offer a feeling of control at a time when there is often increased uncertainty. It is likely to be helpful to speak with your doctors or specialist nurse about what might happen in the future. It can be difficult to plan without some information about what to expect, even if some uncertainty remains. Putting plans in place, making arrangements, talking through plans with family and friends can be extremely emotional. It does not have to be achieved in one sitting and can be revisited when the time feels right. What to consider? There are several subjects that might be helpful to discuss with those important to you. These may include some or all of the list shown on the screen. It is important to remember that most of these documents are not legally binding. They do, however, provide a guide of someone's wishes and will be taken into account by any professionals involved in your care. Whilst you have the ability and capacity to be involved in decision making, you would always be asked for your thoughts and opinions. There are various resources that can be used to help guide the conversation and support you in planning. It is useful to take short notes or a reminder of what has been discussed. So, thinking about making a will. This is an important document to have, whatever age or stage of life you're at. Without a will, the law decides who will get your possessions, finances, or property. You can make a will on your own, but it is generally best to use a solicitor. The Law Society can provide you with a list of local solicitors, and there's a web address on the screen that can be reached by typing it into your search engine. Many people have heard of a lasting power of attorney, or LPOA, and is another document to consider. An LPOA is a legal document that allows you to appoint one or more person that you trust to make decisions on your behalf when you are unable to make them for yourself. It is important to think carefully about who you appoint and which decisions you are comfortable with them making. Some discussion about how they make decisions about your care and treatment or finances is helpful, and also what happens if an attorney becomes unwell or dies. An LPOA can be made online using the government website and does not need a solicitor to make one. An address for the government website can be copied from the slide. As can be seen, there are two types of LPOA, one for health and welfare and one for property and finances. There are options regarding advanced statements of treatment and care. These are specific documents which you may wish to consider completing to offer thoughts or preferences about your care in the future. These documents may vary in different areas of the country. They may include treatments you would accept in the future or what you would like to happen in an emergency. Whilst these documents are not legally binding, if you're unable to communicate your wishes, they are valuable in letting people know all about you and will help inform decisions about your treatment and care. An advanced decision to refuse treatment may be something to think about. In this document, you can be specific about which treatments you would not wish to be given in the future and under or in which circumstances. They must be written in a certain way to ensure they are legally binding, meaning they can be followed when needed. I would advise that you discuss this with your doctors or specialist nurses. Future care needs. or preferred priorities of care. It may be helpful to consider where you would like to be cared for in the future. This may be staying at home with help from your family or staying at home with paid carers coming into your house as often as required. You may decide you prefer to be in a care home or hospice for end-of-life care. Things to consider are how you'd pay for your care, if you are entitled to any benefits, any adaptations that may need to be made to your home, the possibility of moving closer to family or friends, and what support is available locally in the community. We don't often talk about planning for dependents or pets, or practical things like where we keep important documents, such as birth certificate or bank account details, but these are helpful and useful conversations to have. Health professionals may also speak about preferred place of care or preferred place of death. It's important to try and talk to your family and friends about any wishes you may have about how you may be cared for in your last short weeks or days of life. For example, you may have an idea about having peace and quiet, or may prefer some specific music playing or the radio. Some people might like a good, brightly lit room, whilst others may prefer it fairly dark. Some people enjoy having their hand held or even a gentle hand massage, whilst for others this would not be welcome. Of course, you cannot always predict how you might feel and may change your mind as your health changes. And on to considering planning for and paying for your own funeral. Talking about what you might like for your funeral with your family and friends may provide great comfort, knowing your funeral is how you want it to be. Some family members may find comfort in helping you to plan a funeral as part of their grieving process. This may include where you would like the service to be, if you would like to be buried or cremated, what songs or reading you would like, and some thoughts about a eulogy, and whether you would like flowers or donations to a specific organisation. You may also choose to plan the wake. If you choose to pay for your funeral costs in advance, you may wish to set up a funeral prepayment plan. You can find out more about this from the National Association of Funeral Directors. Again, there is a link on the screen. And finally, what's in it for me? It sounds like a number of stressful and emotional conversations. It can seem confusing as there are many ways to plan and each one is slightly different. The conversations can indeed be difficult, especially when speaking with loved ones. However, what people say to us when they've made plans, positive comments like, "It feels like such a relief to have made plans that will help my family when I'm no longer able to help with decisions or am no longer here. It feels as if a weight has been lifted as my loved ones know my feelings. I can now get on with living the rest of my life, knowing I've done the best I can to prepare." Whatever you decide, it's important to discuss this with your loved ones and with the doctors, nurses, or any other professionals involved in your care. This will help to relieve stress and enable clear planning. There is further information on the Arthur Rank website, and the final slide shows a few suggestions for further reading. Thank you for watching. Hello, my name is Katie Williams. I'm a clinical nurse specialist working within the Living Well service at Arthur Rank Hospice. When people visit our service, we hope to encourage them to consider their future care needs. In the following video, I hope to give you a brief understanding of advanced care planning and what that may involve. Why consider advanced care planning? We happily plan for all major events in life, such as weddings, birthdays, Christmas, holidays, and definitely for having a baby. Planning for dying and our own death is something we rarely do and may even put off. Even as a fit and healthy person, it's helpful to have an idea of what we might wish for at the end of life, and especially when faced with a life-limiting illness. We can never be certain when our health or life might change. What can be considered? There are several decisions that could be considered when planning for our future and for our end-of-life care. This can reduce our own stress and perhaps the stress of those we love as well. It may also offer a feeling of control at a time when there is often increased uncertainty. It is likely to be helpful to speak with your doctors or specialist nurse about what might happen in the future. It can be difficult to plan without some information about what to expect, even if some uncertainty remains. Putting plans in place, making arrangements, talking through plans with family and friends can be extremely emotional. It does not have to be achieved in one sitting and can be revisited when the time feels right. What to consider? There are several subjects that might be helpful to discuss with those important to you. These may include some or all of the list shown on the screen. It is important to remember that most of these documents are not legally binding. They do, however, provide a guide of someone's wishes and will be taken into account by any professionals involved in your care. Whilst you have the ability and capacity to be involved in decision making, you would always be asked for your thoughts and opinions. There are various resources that can be used to help guide the conversation and support you in planning. It is useful to take short notes for a reminder of what has been discussed. So, thinking about making a will. This is an important document to have, whatever age or stage of life you're at. Without a will, the law decides who will get your possessions, finances, or property. You can make a will on your own, but it is generally best to use a solicitor. The Law Society can provide you with a list of local solicitors, and there's a web address on the screen that can be reached by typing it into your search engine. Many people have heard of a lasting power of attorney, or LPOA. It is another document to consider. An LPOA is a legal document that allows you to appoint one or more person that you trust to make decisions on your behalf when you are unable to make them for yourself. It's important to think carefully about who you appoint and which decisions you are comfortable with them making. Some discussion about how they make decisions about your care and treatment or finances is helpful, and also what happens if an attorney becomes unwell or dies. An LPOA can be made online using the government website and does not need a solicitor to make one. An address for the government website can be copied from the slide. As can be seen, there are two types of LPOA, one for health and welfare and one for property and finances. There are options regarding advanced statements of treatment and care. These are specific documents which you may wish to consider completing to offer thoughts or preferences about your care in the future. These documents may vary in different areas of the country. They may include treatments you would accept in the future, or what you would like to happen in an emergency. Whilst these documents are not legally binding, if you are unable to communicate your wishes, they are valuable in letting people know all about you and will help inform decisions about your treatment and care.
My name is Dr. Lorraine Peterson. I'm Medical Director of the Arthur Rank Hospice charity, and I would like to welcome you all to this year's annual lecture. The title for this year's event is simply Palliative Care and MND. There are 3 reasons why we've chosen the theme for this year, why we're going to focus on motor neurone disease in particular. And the first is because of the many inspirational people that we have met in our working lives who have first-hand experience of what it means to have MND join the story of their lives. We'd like you to meet Lee Taylor, Tracy, his wife, and his friend and physiotherapist Andy. Some of you may already know Lee through his extensive charity work for us and for the MND Association. Lee's pre-recorded his session for this evening and comes from his home, and he will also be joining us online. So welcome Lee and Tracy and family who may be with you. The second reason for choosing this title is because of the inspirational people, the professionals who we have met in our working lives, whose research, whose leadership, publications, teaching and creation of national and international guidance on the management of MND have shaped and influenced our practice over years. We would like you to meet Professor David Oliver, retired consultant in palliative medicine. The third reason for choosing this theme, well, I'm actually going to leave that one till after the talk. So there will be time for questions and answers after the talk. Please start posting straight away. I believe there's a chat function that you can access on your screen. We will collate similar questions and we will try to answer all of them. Lee is also open to questions. He will answer them after the talk. So if we find that we've got lots of unanswered questions, we will endeavour to answer them and to post Lee's responses all at the same time. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our speakers for this evening. Thank you.
It's important to me that I keep doing what I'm doing the best I can. My mindset now, I've changed 100%. I'm really content, very content. I'm living, I'm breathing, I'm moving, just very. It's a slow rate, but I'm alive. And I'm not going to say it yet, but I'm loving life. So treating my arm, I was a bit fatigued. And I know treating my right arm. And I remember it quite clearly. There was a Sunday afternoon, and my family and I sat down for Sunday dinner and a church of food, which I'd never done before. And it was really quite funny. So in the treatment arm, in my left arm, in my right arm, my speech and chair. That look all right. So, went to sources and I got referred to neurologist, and that's what I diagnosed with Palliative. So Palliative affects the speech first, and more than anything else. everything. They'll come in. They'll come in there. When I was busy, I set myself a 3-month window. When you want them, first one, I just go share. I sat in front of a mirror and I interviewed myself about death. I was going to go to as a kid, it was so emotional. I thought, well, I don't make death fun. I said to myself, when you're born, everyone smiling, everyone's happy. You die, everyone's crying, all down. No my children, all crazy. No, I don't want this to be sad. I want it to be more like a celebration. As you tell me to him, go down the house. I've got no tools. And as we are, I love being outside. I love being out with people. So, when those days are very, very tough for me. I feel like I just exist. And I don't know what to exist, I want to live. But before them in there. I said, I was really strong. I'm mentally weak. I'm mentally weaker. But mentally strong. And now what bothering is mentally strong. I did not realize before I did everything that I was depression. Every day I was working, traveling, family life, gym. Really about strange you are. And he realized that I was depression. I knew why I teach you to have authority. But with him, I was going to him. Now, I'm just depressed. All the reason I get to school. And,
Yeah, because like for Hudden, he started reception a couple of weeks ago, and you didn't think you'd be able to be here for that. But so you came to school on the first day, and little things like that.
it's just better to see kids small. They have a good time. I wish they were out the room.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk tonight. It's a great privilege and it's wonderful to be able to share it with Lee, and we'll have Lee back on a little bit later. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about my experiences of palliative care and how it's been with motor neurone disease. And for the first time, having worked perfectly before, my slides aren't working. With it in business. That's a lot bigger picture of me because you only see a little bit of me at the moment. As has been said, I'm an honorary professor at the University of Kent. I'm still working in an academic field, but I worked as a consultant at the palliative medicine at the Wisdom Hospice for over 32 years until I retired a few years ago. I've been very lucky. The university is in Canterbury overlooking the cathedral, and I've worked in a hospice that had Rochester Cathedral and Rochester Castle nearby. So how was I involved with motor neurone disease? I had the privilege of working with Dame Cicely Saunders at St Christopher's Hospice back in the early 80s. I had actually been there as a medical student several years before, but went back as a registrar and a senior registrar in 1982. And on that first week, I think, I met my first patient with MND. Janet, a lady, she said she was 54, but I think it was a little older, who had been a singer in operetta, who taught me a great deal about MND, and also gave me her teddy bear that she'd been given by an admirer back when she was met at the back of the stage. Cicely Saunders asked me to write a paper on MND. Well, I was told to do it rather than asked. And that started my interest, and it increased. When I was appointed in 1984 as the consultant for palliative medicine at Wisdom Hospice in Rochester, they already had been involved with MND patients, and I was able to carry on that. The MND Association had started just a little while before that time, and the leaflet I'd used at St Christmas was used for the new leaflet on the management of symptoms. And so from that, several books, hundreds of articles later, national and international talks, it all followed on from that. So what have I learned about MND over these years? I wanted to talk about that, comparing to how he is coping. I think we've seen more knowledge about MND. We'll talk about the genetics. We now know that it affects not only the nerves that go to muscles, but brain. And I can remember giving a lecture saying the brain isn't affected in MND 35 years ago. There are new treatments, gastrostomy, feeding tube, we'll talk about later, ventilation and support of breathing, and the increase in multidisciplinary team care. And I think there have been new challenges over the 30 years. Issues within families, the coping with decision making, and issues around end of life, about withdrawing treatments we've started, and at times assisted dying discussions. So let's just say a moment or two about MND. There are about over 5,000 people with the disease in the UK at the present time. It's a progressive disease. It does affect the nerves that go to muscles, so it may affect walking, arm movement, swallowing, speech, breathing muscles, and cause problems with breathing, with the control of the neck. And increasingly, we're seeing changes within the brain with people having cognitive change, that they are affected. It's disabling. There are treatments. When I started back in 1984, there were no treatments at all. In 1995, riluzole came, which has been shown to slow progression to some extent, a small effect. And then this year, there have been the reports of gene treatments for people with genetic forms of the disease, which may open up a lot for the future. When we look at the genetics, we've always known that 5 to 10% of people have a family history of MND, but no one knew quite how. And over the years, there are now many, many genes that have been found that are abnormal in these patients. And 50% of the families where it does seem to run in the family can now be tested and found to have an abnormal gene. That may open the possibility for treatment in the future, but it also means that families can be tested if they want to find out if they have that gene and are at risk of developing the disease later. A very difficult decision, and what you do with that information. The other 90% of people are said to have sporadic MND. There's no obvious family history. But interesting, in the UK in particular, 10 to 20% may have an abnormal gene. It's known particularly the C9orf72 gene. So it's becoming more and more clear that there is a genetic aspect to MND. It's not just genetic, and that there is talk of there needs to be 5 different effects on the body to get MND. And if you have an abnormal gene, that might give you 3 or 4 of those 5, and it's something else may trigger the disease. That may be other genetics. Some people may be protected by having other genes, or may have genes that make it more likely, or it may be something in the environment. There's been a lot of discussion, I know, recently about exercise, and certainly athletes do seem to have MND more often than people who are less athletic, and perhaps that is an effect. And we talked about treatment. There isn't a cure. The riluzole does slow the disease down. Daravone is another drug that slows deterioration. And then more recently, there's this new drug called tofersen, particularly for people with the gene defect known as SOD1. And this drug actually acts within the cell. It's a genetic effect and blocks the gene's effects. And it wasn't a dramatic effect, but it did have effect on people with that particular gene defect. I think opens up the possibilities for the future. There is one other new drug that's just been shown to be effective called PB-Turso, which again seems to reduce the risk of people getting into hospital and even dying. That's at a very early stage of development and becoming available. So the reality for MND is the prognosis is usually said to be 2 to 3 years. That's always difficult to know because it often takes a year from the first symptoms to get being diagnosed. But 25% of people with MND are alive at 5 years and 5 to 10% at 10 years. And how has palliative care been involved with MND? St Christopher's Hospice opened in 1967 and admitted MND patients from very early on. And many hospices have been involved in MND care. Often that may be only in the very late stages and some much earlier in the care. And the role of palliative care has been very strongly recommended in the NICE guidance, which I'll come back to a bit later. Now, people who are coming to a session like this will know what palliative care is, but I thought I'd just reinforce the definitions from the World Health Organization. An approach that improves the quality of life of patients, adults and children and their families facing problems associated with life-threatening illness. It prevents and relieves suffering through the early identification, correct assessment and treatment of pain and other problems, whether physical, psychosocial and spiritual. And all those words are really important. It's patients and families, it's quality of life, and it's life-threatening illness. And I think we can all agree that MND fits into that category. I think palliative care has become much more complicated to describe. And often we talk of a palliative care approach, which I think is what is good care. It should be available for all patients at all times, that doctors, nurses and professionals communicate well, that we help people make decisions, not make them for them, and we control symptoms. There's generalist palliative care for people who are providing more palliative care in their day-to-day work, and I've spent many years trying to convince neurologists that they are providing generalist palliative care and need the extra training. And many areas that happens, or is a member of the team. And then specialist palliative care is provided at a hospice, or with a team at home, or a specialist team in the hospital. It's specialists, they're people who've had specialist training, work as a team together, and are particularly looking at more complex issues. But the complexity may vary because complex for some doctors is what we may see as very simple, but it's complex to them. But I think palliative care has a lot to offer. We can reduce the effects of the disease on the person by helping with symptoms and the other issues. Maintain the power they have got. And what we're doing in palliative care every day, enabling patients and families to live a full life as possible. Get on and live. As Cicely Saunders said, allowing people to live and live until they die. So when might palliative care be involved? This is a diagram from Simona Veronese in Turin, Italy, and it shows the idea that palliative care may vary over the course of someone's illness. Perhaps at the time of diagnosis, when someone is confronted with this new disease they've never heard of before, they need the opportunity to talk about that. A little bit later, they may have problems with swallowing, and the specialist input may be needed then. perhaps then with breathing, perhaps then with other symptoms, and then particularly at the end of life, but not only at the end of life. And then also carry on into bereavement for the families. And how do we know that someone has those increased needs? The little magnifying glasses Simone has put there to suggest that everyone is assessed regularly. It may be just a very quick questionnaire, a short opportunity to tell someone what symptoms they have, what problems they have, so that specialists and increased input can happen. And that period may be over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5, many more years, according to that particular person. But perhaps the most important thing is to say that palliative care is not just at the end of life. I have spent all my time, particularly with neurology, talking of the need to be involved early in the diagnosis so that we can build up that relationship with someone. Is palliative care effective? I think there is increasing evidence. There's so many studies now. The Turin study that I was involved with Simona looked at the palliative care team's involvement, comparing that to the usual care. And it was a group of people with neurological disease, including many people with MND. And over a 4-month period, the people who had had the palliative care input, we could show that they had an increased quality of life. And that's very difficult to do with someone who's very disabled, to work out what quality of life is. But then we used a special system where someone could rate various aspects of their life. So they might say, when they were up and about and moving more easily, I like going to the football match and taking my grandchildren to the swings and going out for a dinner. And they rate that and we come up with a quality of life. But weeks or months down the line, we can ask again what's important to them. And they say, well, I can't actually go to the football, but I watch it on the TV. That's nearly as good. I can't go take my grandchildren out to the slide and the swings, but I really enjoy them coming and seeing me. And we don't go out for a meal, but my wife cooks some very nice meals for me and help we eat together. And that actually they can rate their quality of life as good, if not better. People had improved symptoms of pain, breathlessness, sleep and bowel problems. And perhaps most importantly, death rates in the two groups were the same. So it wasn't that palliative care meant that everyone died. And I know I've talked to neurology groups where I start talking about morphine and palliative care, and they all think everyone will die as soon as they are seen in palliative care. That does not happen. So what are the changes that there have been over the 30 years? I think aspects of breathing has been a really great change. People may be short of breath because the muscles in their chest and their diaphragm is weak. So they may be short of breath in the day, or they may have evidence of breathing problems. At night, when we lie down and our guts start pushing up on our lungs, people have more problems with their breathing. Their sleep, they may wake up many times in the night. They wake up with a headache, they have bad dreams because they aren't getting enough oxygen into their blood and they're not clearing the carbon dioxide waste out of their blood. And I think we're more and more aware that this is something that is very ominous, that someone's getting iller, and it shows that their muscles are weaker in their chest and their diaphragm. And there are ways that we can help that now. We can use ventilation. I'll show you an example of non-invasive ventilation, which uses a mask and which supports the breathing. So, and I'll show an example in a moment. Or it's invasive ventilation with a tracheostomy in the neck with a tube going straight in down to the lungs. But there are other ways of helping. Morphine and opioids in a carefully assessed dose can be really, really helpful to someone who's breathless. And may even be used with someone who's having the other ways with ventilation. This is a man with a mask for non-invasive ventilation. It's not an easy thing to cope with. This man, when I went to see him, I went to him because everyone said, oh, I think he's got prostate problems. Because not only has he got MND, but now he's getting up 5 or 6 times a night. And a little bell rang in the back of my brain, and I thought I'd better go and see what's going on. And it was very apparent the reason he was waking up was because the oxygen level was dropping in his blood because of his breathing when he was lying down flat. He started on uninvasive ventilation. And the next day, the first morning after he'd had a night with the mask, he had breakfast for the first time in 6 months. He felt hungry again. He didn't need to use the mask in the day, and he was able to get around. He felt better. He was doing more. He was eating more and felt much clearer and better. And interestingly, his prostate problem got better. I'd cured his prostate with a mask on his breathing because he was now not getting those dips in the oxygen level that was waking him up, but he was actually getting good amounts of oxygen into his system all through the night. I'll come back to him in a moment. This was a man who went into hospital to have a knee operation and came out with a tracheostomy and a diagnosis of MND. He had been feeling breathless at times. He went in for his knee operation. At the end of the operation, they weren't able to stop the ventilator that had been keeping him breathing while he was anaesthetized. Over the next few days, as he had a tracheostomy, he was kept alive with the machine. And then people started talking to him properly and realized he had the symptoms and the signs of MND. He came across from the respiratory unit to the hospice and then got home. This is taken in his own home. And he wanted me to make sure that I had that glass of beer in the corner. That was a very important part of his day. But because he was enjoying life, he could still speak, he could walk a little bit. He would go out in a wheelchair. He watched his granddaughter play football in his electric wheelchair, and he lived a good life. But was always absolutely bound to that machine. Without that machine guiding his breathing, he couldn't live. Behind me is his wife, who was very, very anxious. She was finding it difficult to cope with having the machinery at home, the noise, all the things that involved having to have a sucker to suck out the mucus from the tube. And she found it very difficult. He had 24-hour care. And one night she'd come down to have a cup of tea herself and found the carer asleep. And from that day, she could never truly relax. But he lived a good quality of life, and he made it very clear, and we'll talk about advanced care planning later, but he made it very clear that he did not want to go back into a hospital. He called it a something else hospital first, and stayed at home, and one morning had just deteriorated and died within a short period of time, at home where he wanted to be. Because there is a problem with non-invasive ventilation and other ventilation, that people feel much better, their sleep and appetite improve. But not everyone can cope with a mask, and the MND will still progress. So someone will become weaker, their speech might deteriorate. And we need to look at further planning and consider whether the benefits are no longer worthwhile and the person wants to stop. The man in the corner who had the mask when I took that photo actually said, I wished I'd never started this thing. I now can't speak very well, I can just about walk. I'm really distressed by it all. This was many, many, many years ago, before we got so aware and trying to help people with fraud treatment. Because now we would say if any person can ask for treatment to be stopped if they wished. this is legally and ethically allowed. It is not euthanasia. But you may need to give medication before stopping ventilation because someone may feel very, very breathless. But it's important to say that the person dies of MND and the disease, not from the machine being stopped. So there's that big ethical area, those big complicated discussions that may have to be had all the way through while someone is receiving that treatment. What about swallowing? I said earlier that swallowing can be affected, and there are some basic things we need to do. Careful feeding, altering the consistency of the food, having time to eat. I had a patient who went on holiday with his family and lost weight because they went down to the restaurant and he would take 2 hours to have his food. Of course, a hotel restaurant shuts up after about 45 minutes to an hour, and he never finished his meal. And increasingly over the years, we have talked about gastrostomy tube, the feeding tube, which goes through the stomach wall into the stomach directly so that water and food can be given that way. It's not an easy decision again. A very well-known dietitian suggested that you need to find out whether someone lives to eat or eats to live. I don't know what it's like in your household. This is one of the areas that causes problems at home. My partner lives to eat. She plans the meals, she loves cooking them, will take time to eat them. I've been a doctor, a junior doctor, and those days when I was a junior doctor, you ate your food as quickly as possible before you were called off to some other place in the hospital. So I tend to eat to live. The one area that might change is with the cream tea in the picture, but so that causes problems because I get accused of not chewing the food and hardly tasting it because I finished the meal. The plate is empty on my plate before she's hardly started because she's going to savour each thing. For someone who savours food, a gastrostomy may be really difficult. For someone who just eats because they have to, gastrostomy might feel quite good because you can just put the food down and not have to worry about all the chewing and all that nonsense. And I've had patients who actually could eat better when they had a gastrostomy. Doesn't really make sense, except I looking at the family situation. I think his wife was so anxious that he needed to eat that she got more anxious, which got him anxious, and he tensed up. And it was then, once he didn't have to eat, he could have had the meal through the gastrostomy. His eating improved. So more and more we've discussed early insertion of tubes. It can be used as a top-up. On a bad day, on a hot day, can be used for nutrition or hydration. And I think may allow someone to stay at home if they're very keen to be at home and die at home, because medicines and fluids can be given very late in the disease process progression. And what about communication? I think that's changed so dramatically over the years. Speech and language therapy is really important. Interestingly, within palliative care, that's often very limited. A survey we've done of hospices in the UK, only about 25% had a speech and language therapist within their team. They're simple things to help with people writing. I always like those magic slates that people can write on and then pull and it goes away again. Or there's the light writer, or now laptops, iPads, even systems which will look and pick up your eye movements and allow you to use a computer. Things have changed a lot, but other things we're more aware of which might affect that communication. Communication may be speech and not being able to understand things, but it may be the understanding. And now we know about 10 to 15% of people with MND have frontotemporal dementia. That's a different dementia to Alzheimer's. It's more about decision making, of control and empathy, loss of empathy, and very difficult form of the disease. But another up to 50% have changes showing that their brain is affected. And that may affect decision making. And when I look back, I remember the nurses and myself saying that person was so difficult. And I think they were being difficult. They were finding it difficult to make a decision. But they were finding it difficult to know whether to have the blue shirt or the red shirt in the morning, let alone whether to have a gastrostomy, because the brain wasn't working properly. And there are real issues that we need to be aware of. It's not everyone with MND, but for those who have got the evidence of frontal lobe change or frontotemporal dementia, it's very, very important to know about that and help with decision making. Or do people take risks? I have one lady with frontotemporal dementia who her husband was allowing her to drive, and he said, "Follow me, and we're going to shops." And she did follow him in her car. But when the light went red between his car going and her car going, she just carried on driving. When it got to the roundabout, she went round the roundabout despite any other cars. Enormous risks. I think for families, there's the issues about decision making. There may be a lot of empathy, and the person may be altered. They're a different person. And I think professionals also have a real issue about how do we help people make decisions and understanding these changes. I was in a meeting a few years ago with a very senior neurologist who obviously did not know that these changes might occur in MND, because when he was trained 30 years ago, there was no discussion. And people may not appreciate what's going on. And then emotional issues. I've learned how the person with MND and their family, it's multiple losses. It may be speech, breathing, moving arms, being able to communicate, changes of roles within families. The person who's done all the banking can't even do any of it. The fears of the disease and the fears of death and dying. I'll come back to that a little later. Finances, and we may be facing that even more over the coming months. The emotional changes. And then, do we talk about sex? This is what happens if you sit and read a book of poetry with your brother-in-law with no clothes on. It's just a warning to you. But do we think about sex and sexuality and intimacy in palliative care? We're very good at death and dying. That's not an issue. But do we talk about what happened, what may happen, what changes might be needed? And I had a patient, we did a small survey of patients. One man wrote, "Thank God that's not a muscle." I think he understood what he was talking about. And one wife wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore when I put my husband to bed. Am I his nurse? Am I his wife and lover?" And that hit me particularly because I could imagine the Wisdom Hospice, we would be pleased that someone was putting her husband to bed. But I've got a feeling a helpful nurse might bang on the door and say, "Can we help?" Which might be helpful, but might not be helpful or appropriate. So it's how do we talk about those issues and allow people to express their feelings. I wrote a book, I think I can advertise it, it's going out of print, MND, A Family Affair. And the one paragraph that has been discussed with me more than any by patients and families is the bit that I wrote about sexuality. And what about other changes over the 30 years? I think we've had the multidisciplinary teams changed. I remember coming to Cambridge, actually, physically, back in, I think it was 2000, when it was very apparent that all the neurologists were seeing 1 or 2 MND patients per year. And I know at the meeting it was suggested, look, if 2 of us saw 10 patients, we could build up some expertise. And it would allow us to develop a proper clinic. Over the years, there's now a specialist clinic and a specialist MND centres. And I think that team, which does include doctors and nurses, but has, and I'll leave someone out, I apologise, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language, dietitians, psychology, social work, all that wider team can provide so much better care. And within that, there's increasing research. There's always a lot of research and a lot of emphasis on the basic cause of MND and of drug trials, but there are now more and more research studies on how we care for people with MND. And I think that's as important. The multidisciplinary approach was very much recommended by the NICE, that's the National Institute for Health and Social Care Excellence Guidance on MND. This was issued in 2016. I had the privilege of chairing the group that came up with this guidance. There were many, many recommendations, but one of the most important was for the multidisciplinary team approach, and that team should include palliative care. Either one of the members of the team, a neurologist or a nurse, who had extra training themselves, or bringing in someone from a palliative care team. And there's several studies now that shows that multidisciplinary team working not only improves quality, but actually length of life. This one study showed that the people who were being seen in MDD were living 18 months. The people who were just seeing the neurologist once every 6 months or so lived 11 months. So as good as any drug, probably better than most drugs. And interestingly, when the NICE guidance was put together, the health economics was looked at, and it's cost effective. Although it may cost money, you actually improve care and improve life, and it's cost effective. However, since 2016, we're now nearly 6 years on, and in many, many areas, many of the recommendations haven't been taken on. And local health systems have said, oh, they're only recommendations, we won't get fully involved. This could make an enormous difference to the patient care. And then over the last 30 years, what's happened with end-of-life care? I think has come out, I said again and again, is palliative care is not just the last few months. It may be from diagnosis, or it may be on this variable over time, specialist palliative care being involved with particular complex issues. The biggest advantage of that is that we can start talking to people, perhaps while they can have their speech, to talk up to someone about really deep issues like their psychological issues, their family, their spiritual issues. It's very difficult through a communication aid. So to actually get to know that person earlier is really important. The management of symptoms has improved. Things like non-invasive ventilation, which we'd never have thought of in the past. Anticipating what's happening. And the MND Association has the Just in Case kit, which is actually just a box with medication for a nurse or a doctor to give, or for a medication that a family could give if there was an emergency situation of someone becoming distressed. Because those times tend to be 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, when the system never knows the person. And if an ambulance is called, someone may end up in hospital which they didn't want, and may face distress for a great period of time. So it's a way of anticipating problems and making sure that we're communicating. Are we communicating with the person with MND, with their family, and the other carers? I did a small study many years ago when we looked at who was involved with patients we looked after. And in the area I was, in Rochester and Swale, we had about 20 to 25 patients at any one time. And I asked the patients, and we came out wonderfully well. I was seeing people 15 to 20 times over the course of their illness. The physiotherapist was going 30 times. Weren't we wonderful? Until we realised that the carer who was going in every morning and every lunchtime and every evening to provide personal care and perhaps get that person up, we never thought of at all. And what was harder for them was if the person died, the next morning they would be sent off to somebody else with no appreciation of how they may feel, or minimal appreciation. Because I think that support of everyone involved, and that's another important part of the multidisciplinary team. I think the reason the multidisciplinary team works so well is that a physiotherapist can see a problem, come back and talk to another member of the team immediately without that patient having to wait to see the doctor or see the nurse. But it also means we could all sit down together and share our feelings and problems. Doctors have no problems with stress, as everyone knows. We just have a very high divorce rate, suicide rate, drug use rate, and alcohol rate, but we have no problems with stress. So, we do need to be aware of ourselves and how we support each other. And with MND, people do fear choking, do fear pain, do fear breathlessness. And I'm afraid often when MND is talked about, choking is talked about. I've realised this is a long time ago, but when Don Reilly, the ex-football manager, developed MND, the Sun had an article about it, which had the 10 things you want to know about MND. You choke a lot, you choke, and you choke to death. All, and of course, all the people we were looking after with MND all read the Sun and were really distressed at what was being said. Because I think there are fears, and they're fears of dying for everyone. But with good palliative care and good symptom control, choking is a very, very rare cause of death. I've been involved in one study, and there are 3 main studies for hospices with over 500 patients now. One person choked to death. And that was from a St. Christopher's study, and it was a death in the very early days when they opened. Symptoms can be helped, and people with MND and their families can be supported. And if there are fears, let's talk about those and share them and see what we can do to help with that. And people can make their wishes known, and that these can be respected. And I think, again, this is something that has increased a great deal over the years, advanced care planning. That means that someone expresses their views while they can do that. And if they're unable to make decisions later, perhaps because they can't speak clearly, they're unconscious, they have lost the capacity, their brains are no longer able to make those decisions. Their views are known and can be respected. I think it has changed a great deal. We talk more about who can help make decisions. How are we going to cope with the difficulties if you're having communication issues? This is not easy because people don't want to plan ahead. I did give a talk to a group of chest physicians many years ago, and I just said, how many of you have made your will? And I think there were 40 in the room, and about half a dozen hands went up. And we're not good at it as doctors and nurses. Actually, the person who organised the conference emailed me the next day saying, thank you for coming, and I've now booked up to see a solicitor. I've been going to do it next week for the last 15 years, but I'm actually going to do it now. So either all of us try not to put off those decisions, but for someone with MND whose speech may become difficult, whose thinking may become difficult, and becoming more and more disabled, we need to have these decisions talked about early. Where does someone want to be? What are there specific wishes they might have? Are there specific care needs? Are there music that someone likes or doesn't like? Where would they like to die? That may not be the same as where they want to be cared for. Have they made a will? Have they thought about their funeral? Now, some of those are very positive decisions. I think sometimes the will and the funeral may be a negative one. I don't mind who has the money as long as that auntie doesn't have it. I don't, I'm not fussed what happens at the funeral as long as that priest doesn't do it. But it's the opportunity to talk about the future and what is important to each person. There are advanced care plans that are clear. There's an advanced statement that we can make, which is generalised. So I might say, if I have a very low chance of recovery, I don't want to be resuscitated and have heroic measures taken. It's a general. It won't be legally binding, but it gives the carers a chance to know what sort of person you are. An advanced decision to refuse treatment can be specific. And for someone with MND, like the man with tracheostomy, he said, I do not want to go back to hospital. I do not want to be resuscitated. I don't want my tracheostomy changed again. I know if those things happen, I may die, but I do not want them. And that, if it's done correctly and witnessed, is legally binding. And in theory, if someone then did do some of those actions that the person has said they don't want, they could even be prosecuted for assault and battery. Probably the easier decision that many people do is a lasting power of attorney, and that can be for health and care decisions and financial decisions, where you appoint somebody else to make decisions on your behalf if you're unable to make them. If you are doing that yourselves, there is a specific part of the health and care decision about end-of-life care, and that needs to be completed and signed if it's going to have any bearing on your care. But it's allowing others to make the decision. So like when my mother, who had dementia, landed up in hospital, having fallen, I was there with the lasting power of attorney saying she doesn't want any operations, she wants to get back to the nursing home as quickly as possible. Can we do that and don't do any more? And of course, it may also include the do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, DNAR, or increasingly in many parts of the country, RESPECT, which is, I'll have to look this up, the recommended summary plan for emergency care and treatment. And that is really the discussions we've been talking about. What care would someone want? Would they want to be resuscitated? Would they want to have specific things not done to them? Or are there things that they would like to stay at home? They want this to happen, if possible. So I think it's now back over to Lee.
Always be commanding. I don't want to feel. I don't want to be in the back of a car. I don't want to be with each other. That's not me. I'm about fun. It's yours. I don't deal with syndrome. Well, it did put me in the ground. I put my shit in syndromes. But you know, the basic thing. Do you hear me, right? And it's the thing. I was to write songs. I wrote a song with kids. and last year, on radio, we had the song played on radio, and the kids are not heard it. That's what you want to do with that song. You can buy teddy bears. The song is on the teddy bear. That way, when they're lonely, they can just read the teddy bear. And the song will be played to them. With the kids, when they will pass their driving test. So what I don't know, celebrating. Yeah, you passed your driving test well down. Put the keys in the box. What we do that is I've got a box there. I'll pass it through screens. And try to pass the box there. And when they pass the driving test, try to get into the box. I was in the keys there. The car. So, all these things, I blame them. I know insurance. I said, when, I said, let me win. I'll be committed. You'll come back in the nurse force. When you walk out of a boy, flowers, circus, please bring everything in not to be told. I find it because I've done so much about death. I really found death. I really enjoyed me. I really enjoyed about death. It's nothing to be afraid of. What's there is, I've got so everything. Oh, good time. Oh, in that case, when people can see you when we're born, because it just becomes more matter of fact when you give it to somebody else. And I said to myself, Mom, it's off. And I want my family to come. We put him. I don't want to feel down. I want it to be happy. I mean, with my background.
He used to sell medical equipment, like hoists and beds and stuff.
I knew what I need. What I need in my house is not easier. When I saw my own thing, I remember before she come out, I really thought that what I needed. I need this, I need this, I need this. Oh. It's been.
Count you in.
Thank you. I hope Lee, I think, showed very well what someone may wish to say and want to plan. So where are we now? Where are we going? I think where is palliative care and MND? I hope from early in the disease progression. I think my arguments are that allows the chance to have the relationship with someone, to have some of those discussions early on in the disease progression. And the NICE guidance actually talks of talking about end-of-life care from diagnosis as appropriate for each particular patient and family. And many patients will want to talk about dying at the beginning. We did have one lady when she'd been told very well by a very eminent professor and expert in MND, but on the way out of the waiting rooms, someone said, "Oh, here's a leaflet about the MND Association. That'd be really useful, because when you need the wheelchair, they can help you get it. Oh, by the way, don't believe what they say about choking to death." Do you think that lady remembered anything that the neurologist told her about the disease? No. She remembered two things: wheelchair, choking to death. And we spent a good 6 months trying to build up a relationship and put those down to some extent. But even when she was dying several years later, those things were in her mind. The control of symptoms, the care of the patient and the family and the psychosocial care and those aspects of care, and the support of the patient, the family, and the carers. And very much, if possible, to coordinate that care so that people feel coordinated with the many teams and many professionals who may be involved. And that's where a multidisciplinary team, again, can be so important. I've known of patients who a nurse has gone in and thought, this person needs a wheelchair and something for the bath. I'll organise the wheelchair. An occupational therapist has gone in a little bit later and said, I'll organise a wheelchair. Oh, I'm sure the nurse would have done something for the bath. And the person lands up with 2 wheelchairs and nothing to help them with the bath. And I think we need to have that coordinated approach. And then finally, one lady, this is a postcard from Skegness. It's actually Skegness Butlins, I think. I do have problems explaining this to a group of doctors in Poland. They're not very well aware of what Skegness means. This is a lady with MND who went to Skegness Butlins. Nearly not the ideal holiday for me, shall I say, but they were keen to go. She went with her husband and she went with her daughter. Thank goodness. On the back of this postcard was written, thanks, having a good time, out till 1 a.m. every night. See you soon. And this is the lady who got that card written to me. She is in a wheelchair, and you can see. You can't see her gastrostomy tube, her feeding tube. You can't see her communication aid, because she's put it down. But her speech was very difficult to understand. Her hand movements were limited. She couldn't walk for more than a step or 2. And she was virtually dependent on the feeding tube. But she found that she could enjoy Butlins. When the evening came round, her husband went to bed at 9:30 because he'd always gone to bed at 9:30 and he wasn't going to break his routine. Luckily, her daughter said, let's go and see what's going on. They found themselves in the nightclub. And they found that if you pushed a wheelchair around and danced with the wheelchair, no one minded at all. The only problem was lots of people came up and said, can we have a push? That looks good fun. Can we join in? Well, in that environment, she had her communication aid, which she could type in some phrases and it showed up on the aid. Her communication was much, much better than the majority of the other people in the room. Because in a noisy nightclub, everyone was bellowing into each other's ears and not really understanding. So she was not disabled, but actually enabled compared with the rest of the area people. She couldn't have a gin and tonic by mouth, but she found a gin or tonic went down a gastrostomy tube very easily, thank you. You had to make sure the lemon was out of the way, but you could get it down the tube. And you could have a second one. And if you felt a bit dizzy and felt like falling over, you were in a wheelchair anyway, so why worry? So she was able to enjoy herself and get on and do things. And she came back from that holiday and died a few weeks later. It would have been very easy for that lady to say, I can't walk, so I'm just not going to do anything. I can't talk, so what's the point in trying to communicate? I can't swallow, so why am I bothering to drink and eat, have this food through the tube? Actually, gin and tonic down a gastrostomy tube works quite well because bubbly things tend to burp up so one gets the taste. And it would have been very easy for her to do that. But because of all the provision of aids, of the discussion, of the support, she was able to get on and do the things she wanted. And that's the aim of palliative care, enabling people to get on, maintain the quality of life they can, and get on and do things. And finally, I'm going to pass back to Lee, as he's got something to say on that same subject. Thank you.
I mean, the first thing you got to do, you got to accept the diagnosis. You put your foot at the prognosis. The diagnosis is the devil. We will try. But the prognosis, I remember, I did to go some other ago, even 2 years. I mean, well, I'll see you in 20 years. You got to be open. You got to deal with the really dark places. By the way, in my book I say, you yourself a 3-month window. Talk about death. And talk about you. Nobody cares. Also do whatever you want to do. Any wishes. But I say, you do with that, you become free. You know what's coming. So, you might talk about the freer you are. It's important to give them the right message. Or no, or the on time. And no reason to give them. If I look at a bit of you, Mum, I say, well, what kind of message is that I send to my journal? I get a message. I guess we go to the bar. Have fun. You want to live. If you leave with positivity, everyone else around you will be positive. So I need you to live with me. Everybody chose to live with me. If everybody chooses to live with me, I'll take the full 12 months. And I went, okay again. I told her I had 2 years. I need 3 years in. I'll live forever.
Right, welcome back. And we're now on to the question and answer section. We've had a few questions come up, so I'll start. First one is from a lady called Kay. And the question is, what do you think is the main priority to share when we are teaching about MND?
I suppose the top thing is with communication. It's if someone is using a communication aid, do not answer the question, finish the sentence. And so many people will type on I am feeling, and someone tries to finish that. And I think that is really infuriating for the person, and you soon get into real problems with communication. I had one person who we were talking about withdrawing their ventilation, and the communication was using her thumb, her big toe. Left big toe was yes, and no big toe was right. Right, left big toe was no, right big toe was yes. And we went across the spelling board and we got to, she asked, am I going to? And I was just about to talk about, yes, you are going to die, when she finished the sentence, go home. And, so I think if nothing else, that's the most important thing. And I think it's listening to the person and their family as a whole of what real issues are. And if necessary, asking about them. And not feeling afraid to say about, well, some people do find that they have problems with swallowing. Have you noticed anything? And often people will say, actually, now, I did choke on my Sunday lunch. It was the first time. I'm really worried. Like Lee said, it was one of his early symptoms. People may not like to talk about that. And there are other symptoms like this, what's called emotional ability or cerebral palsy, where someone finds they cry or they laugh in what seems to be quite an uncontrollable way. And very few people will talk about that. But if someone has speech problems, may have other evidence of frontal lobe changes, I will say sometimes people find they laugh and cry. Does that ever happen? And the person goes, oh, I'm so pleased you said about it. I thought I was going mad. My daughter said I must be going mad because I'm crying all the time. So actually, you need to be upfront with symptoms. But the communication is the absolutely crucial one that can go wrong so quickly. I suppose the other problem with communication is if you don't understand someone the first time, have another go. If you haven't understood it on 2 occasions, you're very unlikely to get it again, because the person's going to get more and more distraught trying to say the words, and you won't be able to hear it. So what can we do to work out what you are wanting to tell us? Is there another way we can do it? You know, have we got a board, we can show a picture, do something else?
Yes, I think I can certainly relate to that experience, and it's very easy to do shortcuts and, you know, answer the wrong question. So thank you for that. I'm sure Kay will reflect on that and will have had experience of that when she's teaching, especially if we are teaching communication skills, particular to motor neurone disease.
And that we do need to encourage people to talk in short sentences, because we're all terribly British, and if it's not too much trouble and you're passing the kitchen, would you mind, if you don't mind too much, getting me a cup of tea?
Yes, and we do like lots of clauses.
And by the time you've got to tea, you've lost the will to, you know, you can't understand so it's tea, please. You know, trying to help people to make sentences short. But.
Yes, okay, we'll bear that in mind. So next is a question from Anne, and Anne says, "Hello David, my mum was diagnosed earlier this year, aged 82, with ALS, so amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It took some time for us to be referred to the palliative care team, and thank you," she says, "a lovely team at Arthur Rank. My mum is of an age where she believes she had to do as she's told by any member of the medical profession. I think it would have been very easy for her to have had interventions that she was very uncomfortable and unhappy with. The recent conversations we have had with the M&D clinical team have underlined, and it's capitals, it's all her choice. Sometimes I think individual specialist teams forget this point. How can this be highlighted to them?"
I mean, I think it's up to families to say it, and it's up to all of us to keep saying that the person with the disease is the most important. That's the person you need to ask. You know, hopefully I still see it happening, does he take sugar? You know, the person in the wheelchair having a cup of tea and the carer is asked, does he take sugar? We should be past those days. So I think it's, you know, and there is this tendency, I don't know how you find that doctors, nurses, we can do something, so we should do it.
Yes.
And we might be able to do something, but it might not be appropriate. You know, for Anne's mother, you know, having a tracheostomy and a gastrostomy and, you know, may all be too much. And so we need to say, well, there are some things we could do, you know, like the gastrostomy. If you were feeling up to having that done, is that still safe? It might allow you to be at home where you want to be. So that might be a balance on that. That will actually help you do what you want as well as what may help you. But if you don't want other interventions, that's your decision. And I would always say we always treat someone who is breathless. It may be with non-invasive ventilation, it may be with reassurance, with working out a better position for them in bed so they don't get so breathless at night or have the same symptoms at night. If they can sit right up in the bed, they may have fewer symptoms. And morphine may help with that feeling in a small dose on a regular basis. So we always treat, but whether it's with an intervention or something else, or just being there, you know, talking, listening. And I don't know how we get it over to some teams. It can be a problem. And I think it's got more of a problem. The more we can do, the more we want to do. And there are some people who say, look, I think I've had enough. I think there's something that I think society could look back on the Queen. Catherine Mannix, who I know spoke last year at this meeting, wrote about what a good example the Queen was. That she decided she wasn't going to go to hospital, obviously, because she didn't. Her family all came up. Everyone could see her becoming frailer. But still, some people were saying on the day she died, I hope she has a speedy recovery. And actually, it was obvious that she was going to die. But people want to get things better. And I think we've had a good example of how you can say, actually, my wishes are these things, this and this, and I don't want all the heroics and being kept alive or attempts to help me be kept alive, which won't actually be a benefit to me.
Yes, and it's allowing that space, isn't it, when you think about your communication and how we communicate, is allowing people that space to know that these treatments, whilst a decision may need to be made in haste because of a clinical situation, that a decision perhaps to withdraw a treatment, these discussions can happen. It doesn't mean that a treatment started always has to be continued. But if we don't say that from the outset, how do people know that they have a choice? So that has.
And I think that's an important thing. I mean, on the NICE guidance, we say very clearly when starting non-invasive ventilation, start talking about stopping it. So someone knows that they can at any time say, look, I've had enough. I don't want this. And I think we do need to have that communication. But it's a skill that we're not very good at developing within doctors and nurses.
But we're trying.
Hasn't been in the past. It's improving. Yes. It's improving, yes. But there may be some people who trained 30 years ago have had they pick things up over the 30 years rather than actually being trained.
Yes. Thank you. So I hope that answers your question, and obviously there's lots more that we can talk about advanced care planning in particular. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Jane. And Jane says, hi David, thank you. And Lee was very interesting and very thought-provoking. What would you recommend for reducing secretions in somebody who's able to swallow with thickener, so sort of thickened fluids, but lots of secretions, especially at night, and they've tried what sounds like might be a patch, but it's been ineffective.
I could guarantee, I should have put a bet on that someone would talk about secretions. I always think I'm by royal appointment for secretions, because one conference when Fergie was Duchess of York, was patron of the OND Association, came into a lecture I was giving just as I was talking about sputum and secretions.
Okay.
She coped, but the chap behind her was a bodyguard, but very green at that time. But so the things to think of, there is the patch, the hyacinth patch, that can be really useful. There is a tablet under the tongue of hyacinth. It's actually used as travel sickness, quells. The advantage of those is that they work quickly and they wear off. But sometimes if you dry up too much, it gets more difficult. There are antidepressants that can be given, particularly at night, that have the side effect of drying up the mouth, like amitriptyline, which I've used. There's botulinum toxin injections into the salivary glands. I don't know whether anyone's talked about that, James and his family, but it sounds horrific, but actually it's just an injection into the salivary glands. It's a one-off, may need to be repeated after a few months. But I had one person who went from 12 boxes of tissues a day to 12 tissues a day with the secretion. It was that dramatic. people can have radiotherapy to the salivary glands. But the problem with that is, again, it can cause a lot of dryness, and that doesn't wear off. And someone's stuck with a very dry mouth. For the very sticky stuff, it's much more difficult. The really sticky secretions, I mean, people use things like grape juice and pineapple juice and sucking on pineapple. There are some drugs that can be used as well. It's worth a try with the drugs. There's propranolol and some other drugs that are said to help. And good mouth care. I think is someone cleaning their teeth? And I know I feel guilty in hospice sometimes, suddenly realised that someone hadn't had their teeth cleaned, and that there was a need to do that, to just get the mouth as clean and nice as possible. But someone's having that trouble at night, I mean, something like the tablet under the tongue might well be a good option, because it would just cover that period of time. And the botulinum toxin is quite dramatic. I assume that can be done in Cambridge area.
There isn't a clear pathway, but it can be done in theory. Thank you. There are lots of options there. So I don't know, Jane, if you are linked in with a palliative care service, but certainly, we're both thinking we would. And somebody who presents like this would be wanting to learn more and go through all these different approaches. And what's lovely when listening to David and speaking to other clinicians, you learn about other medications that may be helpful, and that's the beauty of talking, across an MDT and across other services. So
the MND Association do have a leaflet on, and if you are with a GP who says, "There's nothing I can do," sometimes hitting them over the head with the leaflet might make them realise that there were other things they could do.
Yeah.
I never minded people pointing out other information that I may have missed.
Yeah, and that absolutely, that's we thoroughly agree with that. So, don't know if there is a leaflet to hit anyone over the head with. I wouldn't.
They're very thin. They're very thin.
Yes, ask a friend. Ask a friend. So I think we've got another question from guest 12. He says, how would you introduce the whole question of the person planning for their funeral and the spouse wanting to know what their wishes are?
I think it's listening. There's more evidence of trying to talk about, are there things you'd like to think ahead about? Are there things you'd like to think ahead about for tomorrow and next week? What about next month? About 3 months ahead.
I think.
Okay.
Do you want me to say? So I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties at David's end. What he was saying was to approach the immediate future and then to extend the timeline. So maybe starting gently.
Starts, it all comes out.
Oh, sorry, if David's back. Sorry, David, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Aha, I've gone unstable, it says. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you now.
It's enabling the person to talk about what they would like to think about. And as I say, it could be to start with tomorrow or next week rather than when we're going to die.
Yes.
And that may lead into other things. So it's starting in a sort of easier way. And it might be actually, I really need to know what you really want when you die, because I don't know what hymns you like for a funeral. You tell me. And often the person will say, yes, actually, I do want this one, I don't want that one, I don't want the other one. I'll leave the rest to you, But you can find out what somebody's views are. There are more booklets, more things about advanced care planning that can be a way of starting a conversation as well. I think it's not many people don't really against talking about it at all. Most people, if given the opportunity, would be pleased to share some of those things.
Do you think sometimes we worry that these conversations will be upsetting and we avoid them and then they don't turn out to be quite so awful or Sorry, I think we're losing David again. Yeah, so I think what we're saying is any questions that we haven't answered, we will come back to. And it's really to say thank you to Lee and to Dave, who've been such inspirational speakers. We can already start to see the feedback. That was such a powerful presentation and a way of hearing from both sides. And I had a question for David, which I was going to ask, which is what inspires you to keep, to have kept on, being so involved with M&D really from quite early on in your career. What has inspired you? Because we know that certainly you've inspired us. And I think David's back and can answer that.
I'm back, yes,
You're
I'm back. Sorry about that. Something went wrong with the ether.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's people I've met, as you said at the beginning. It would have been very difficult without the people with MND and their families who have given so much back to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that, David. Again, I think we're losing you, so I'd say third time lucky, but I'm not sure. It's probably something, I'm afraid, that's beyond our control. So just, I think we'll close for this evening, but I would say the third reason for choosing MND was to be inspired together. And I hope that you've been inspired by today's talk and that will lead to something else, because it's when we come together and we share our stories, and we heard lots of different stories, that then prompts something else. Something else comes of it that's bigger than us. One last thing I just want to say is thank you. I presume that there's some people on the call who are very familiar with our work, and there may be others who are not so familiar. So please do have a look at our website. If you're interested, sign up to our newsletters. In the dark months, of course, we've got things coming up like Light Up a Life, and we've got, for those who like running, we've got a festive run and other things coming up in future months. But it's really to say thank you for your continued support and for your interest and for being the inspiration that helps us with our work. So thank you very much and good night, take care and see you all again soon.